All right, everyone, good morning. I'm back with my analysis of The Ones Who Live, Episode 3. I apologize for it being late. I had to work all weekend, and I had just a really busy, wonky weekend, so I did manage to watch the episode yesterday, but I didn't get around until the analysis, until this morning. Also, there's probably going to be fewer pictures in this video. I apologize for that, but again, it just would have taken me a lot longer to do, and I'm trying to get this out to you, so... let's just dive into the episode. I really enjoyed it, and it was one of those episodes that on first watch, I didn't see a ton of things. I saw a few, but I didn't think that it was going to be a massive TD episode. And then rewatching it and discussing it with my fellow theorists, we actually found a whole bunch more, so that's always good. All right, so... we start, and it was interesting because Gimple, who was, they do the episode Insider on the app where they just give you a couple of minutes at the end where Gimple, or the showrunner, whoever it is, and of course in this case it's Gimple, talks a little bit about the episode, and he specifically pointed out that we started out the episode with 3 different storylines. So one of them was years ago when Rick talks to Jadis in the marketplace, right? What I noticed about this first is that we saw his boots walking. Now, this is a parallel to episode 509 when he disappeared. Remember, they had that shot of his boots on the bridge and there was blood dripping onto them. But we did see this with Beth, too. It was in Inmates when she and Daryl are just walking around in the woods. There was a part where they focused on her boots walking specifically. So I think it's something that they do to show that, we're getting their journey, we're getting the path they're going on, and that in Beth's case, it was highly symbolic. In this case, we're actually being shown the backstory of how Rick, how we got to the present of Rick in the CRM. He does look up and see windmills. There are greenhouses on the roof, and, that's the kind of thing that you would do in the apocalypse, right? But it just always brings me back to Grady because they were growing things on the roof. Jadis does explain her deal with the CRM, from before when she was still with the Heapsters. So that was really interesting and good to get. She also mentions that the CRM can't actually operate in the city. And I thought that was an interesting detail to throw in. She said they want to, but they can't. And I think it's because they are hiding a lot of the despicable things they're doing from the citizens. And they want the citizens to think that this is paradise, which a few of them do say, and that, this is a really great place to be. And obviously, if there was this massive military presence in the streets, it would feel much more domineering. It would feel like, martial law all the time. And so... the military branch is not allowed to operate within the city where the rest of the citizens are. But that actually could be definitely a weakness for bringing them down. So I thought it was interesting that Jadis threw that in. A couple of other details. These are the kinds of things I didn't pick up the first time through. Number one, there actually is kind of a Beth doppelganger in the scene, but we see her all throughout the episode. And I'm going to kind of go over her very last. But a couple of things that Jadis says that are really interesting, that are, I think, kind of symbolic. She talks a lot about French fries, right? And then she mentions onion rings. And the reason this caught our ear is because she basically regurgitates some of Beth's signature dialogue here. She says, French fries are good, but onion rings, that's living. And that's exactly, that was a huge Beth theme, especially at Grady. She said that to, not the French fries and the onion rings, but she talked to Edwards about, do you really call this living? That sort of thing. And so that's a big theme that we associate with her. But then I started thinking about it, and I don't know, French fries and onion rings, it's so random. Why would they choose that above anything else? They're trying to show that they have French fries and onion rings in this place, so it is very close to how the old world used to be, but they could have done that with any food, right? Or anything that wasn't food. There's a lot of ways in which they could have done that. So what we're seeing a lot here is there are quite a few just really, really subtle references to France. And I will go into more of those as well as we go on. But we know Daryl's in France, right? So we feel like it's a kind of a subtle nod to Daryl, where he is, and Daryl's storyline, and probably to Beth. So I was thinking about it, and I was going, okay, if French fries represent France, she said, French fries are okay, but it's the onion rings that are living. And onion rings are an American creation for the most part, and they're also circular. So circles are all about returning to the point you started from. So I know that we're totally geeking out about this and everything, but I do feel like you could almost relate the French fries to not only France, but maybe to Isabel, and then Beth is the onion ring, as ridiculous as it sounds. So, French fries are okay, but onion rings, that's living. And then in the meantime, we have kind of a Beth doppelganger in the background, and she shows up several times throughout the episode. So just some little things, excuse me, that we noticed. So then we move to only hours ago, and we have Rick going to Thorne to ask her to help him get them to allow Michonne to stay, even though she's an A. And Thorne is becoming really, really interesting. She goes around, especially in this episode, saying that her and Rick are more than friends, they're family, and yet she doesn't really act like much of a friend to him. Yeah, they do talk, and they do, have an acquaintance that's friendly and everything, but if they were really good friends and Michonne was important to Rick, then she should be important to Thorne. And Thorne really is kind of all about herself right now and not wanting to be responsible for things and not wanting things to get messed up for her. So Galadriel Jones had an interesting insight that, Major General Beale, we just haven't seen a whole lot from him. We've had a couple of scenes, and it's kind of cryptic. Like, he speaks as though he's very friendly and wants the best for everyone, and yet, he's like the general of this entire operation, and he doesn't come across that way. So she was saying, maybe he's setting someone up to take a fall, and if it's not Rick, then it's probably Thorne. And so, there's a lot more going on under the surface than we're being shown right now. And yeah, Thorne she's just kind of becoming a really interesting character. It'll be interesting to see where they go with her. So then we finally get back to the present, and we have more of Rick and Jadis talking in his room, and her, reiterating that she's going to kill everyone at Alexandria if they try to escape. And it's interesting because he asks her what changed, because she was never concerned about this before when he told her that he was going to escape, and she said, "It's because I knew you couldn't, but you and her together could do anything." So she's admitting on a lot of levels that there probably are ways to escape, even though the CRM says that there isn't, right? And everybody says that there isn't. We get a lot of Michonne's voiceovers on the walkie-talkie talking to Judith, although we're pretty sure Judith can't hear them. So that could be a callback to a lot of things, actually. We've got a lot of radio symbolism, and, of course, Rick and the walkie-talkie with Morgan in the first season. At the reclamation station, there's something spray painted on the wall that says Grimes 68, and we don't really know what that is. Like, was that there before Rick got there and it's just a coincidence that that's his last name, or was he responsible for that? I was thinking that maybe it was a record, like maybe that was how many walkers he killed all at once, and so they put it up on the wall. And then we have a point where Michonne kills a lot of walkers in this, and everyone's super impressed with her. So it might be something like that, but they're not really telling us. They just kind of show it and leave us to draw our own conclusions about it. We see a funeral for Okafor, and Major General Beale talks about a Revolutionary War sword he has. So we've seen revolutionary symbolism before, but really it's just war symbolism. We've seen Civil War, we've seen War of 1812, Napoleonic Wars. It's just all these different revolutions that they like to reference, and it's all pointing toward this revolution against the CRM that obviously Rick will be leading. We also noticed that Major General Beale talked about the word pharmacon, which he said was both a poison and a cure. And obviously that leads us back to Grady, because there's the whole bite cure theory, and were they experimenting and trying to cure people? And of course the CRM is doing experiments to try and understand the virus and how people turn and all of that. So that was interesting. And then Galadriel Jones did some research on that word, and it does mean a poison or a cure, but there's also a third meaning, which is a scapegoat. And that's interesting because, as we said, maybe Beale is setting someone up for a fall. But we also did see that at Grady, right? We saw people not taking responsibility for things. We saw things being blamed on other people, Noah taking the fall for Beth and then being punished for it. So it is, I think, a big theme that in these kinds of organizations, especially where there's really toxic leadership, you get this sort of thing going on. There's not true justice, because as long as someone's punished and there's some sort of scapegoat, the leadership is okay with that. And, you kind of wonder if Beale is the same way, especially for anybody who watched The World Beyond, for how his son kind of turned out. So, just kind of some interesting wordplay going on there. Let's see. We find out that Thorne was promoted and briefed, and she knows everything about the CRM now, but it does sound like Rick will be there eventually too. Rick he takes out some maps and starts documenting the disruptions. They use these explosions to, turn the walkers one way or another, and he starts documenting them, and that's so that he can try to escape with Michonne. And of course, then they go through this whole escape plan. That the interesting thing about it is that it does actually work. If Michonne had done what Rick wanted her to do and left, it would have worked. So there are ways to get out of the CRM. It's just really, really hard. And I think the biggest problem is that he's had a hard time finding anyone who actually wants to and would be willing to help him do that. So, okay, a few things to go over here. First of all, Rick finds a note written in the sand that says, "Tell them I'm sorry." And again, much like the Grimes 68, they don't tell us what that is. It's just something he looks at, that maybe somebody left before, or maybe he put that down there before. I don't know. It doesn't tell us what's going on with that, but I'm sure it will end up having significance at some point. He leaves a key and a map in a locker for Michonne. That really strongly calls back to Sherry leaving a key and a map for Daryl to escape from the sanctuary. So we have some parallels going on here. He did leave her sword, which I thought was fun. As she's walking along the route to try and meet him, which she thinks they're both going to be escaping, that she comes across something that says Spring Garden, and it's like a turnstile kind of metal gate, and of course there's all these walkers trapped inside. And I don't know, I was thinking about it for a long time, and I couldn't really put my finger on what the point was, but I talked to my fellow theorists about it, and we were thinking that it could be a resurrection symbol because spring is generally when Easter is, and of course these walkers are trapped and then sort of break out at some point. I also thought it could be a revolving door of life and death. So it could be resurrection. Of course, at the time, Rick and Michonne are trying to break out. So it could be also symbolic of they're trying to escape, they're trying to break out. But the walkers, at least one of them, when they break out, this walker gets kind of smushed to mush, in order to get the turnstile to start turning and let the rest of them out. So maybe it's just a sign that the escape plan isn't really going to work. I mean, it could be a lot of things, but it was just kind of this random detail that they put in there. And of course, we have seen other turnstiles. The first one for me that came to mind was in season 1 at the mall, and that was because it was specifically walkers trying to push through a glass turnstile in the mall, and eventually they did and got in. But then, of course, we also had Noah in season 5. And again, this is why it kind of makes me think it's a revolving door of life and death, because Noah and Glenn were in that turnstile. They were both trapped, and then Noah died and Glenn lived. So you kind of have both. One lives and one dies in order to get out. And that actually leads to what Rick said about how to get out of the CRM, and that is you have to have somebody on the inside. Somebody, I don't know, it's like somebody has to be willing to sacrifice in order to get out. And it just has really, really interesting implications. He would have sacrificed himself to stay there so that Michonne could leave. Of course, she wasn't having any of that. But we also talk about Beth as a sacrifice. Maybe that was the only reason, because of what happened to Beth, that Team Family even got away from Grady or got out of Atlanta, and they just don't understand exactly what was going on there, and I think it's also a foreshadow for the future. So just some really interesting stuff. Of course, she finds the note that says he's not coming, and she goes back. He tries to get Jadis to help him. I have to chuckle at Jadis. She just has so much hubris. I mean, I love her as a character. I think she's super interesting, but even after knowing Michonne is there, she still suggests that Rick is staying maybe for her because she saved his life. And I just had to kind of facepalm at that, She's clearly still got a crush on Rick and everything. But I think it also does show that despite all of her words about how she's all in and she's a believer and she's built a life for herself in the CRM that she doesn't want to see compromised, she's still lonely. You can tell she is. And, that's the biggest problem with the CRM not necessarily with the CR, because a lot of the citizens in there do have families and have made connections, but specifically in the military branch, there are no connections. You know what I mean? There's people are lacking human connection to each other, and that's probably going to end up being their downfall. It usually is. And of course, you have this wonderful line from Rick where he tells Jadis sarcastically, "You're a hero with a shit haircut." I laughed for 5 minutes when he said that. It's after that we see Michonne go back to the reclamation station, and impress everybody with her walker killing skills, right? But then when Rick comes to talk to her, I just kind of had to chuckle at this part too, because Michonne's clearly pissed. And, understandably so, but it just kind of made me smile, like you don't want Michonne being pissed at you. She does take off his helmet, which I thought was interesting. She takes it and throws it down. And I'm not reading anything super big into that, but it was just kind of interesting because the helmet becomes sort of a mask for him. And, she wanted him to look her in the face and talk to her. And so it just kind of goes back to the whole mask theme. And not, she's not letting him hide behind the mantle of the CRM. She's making him talk to her. It's very much what couples kind of do, true love couples in the Walking Dead world. So Michonne and Rick do this. Obviously, Beth also did this for Daryl. She refused to let him hide. She made him talk to her and figure out his emotions and everything. That's how you can tell that they are a true love couple. We see this with all of them. We've seen it with Carol and Ezekiel. I mean, we know, even though we didn't see it on camera, we know that Carol talked to Ezekiel about things she didn't even talk to Daryl about. So that's really, really significant. And Sasha and Abraham, all of them, everybody does this. So after that, Michonne is super depressed because Rick isn't very gung-ho about leaving. But then she finds this guy, I don't know that we're ever told his name, who is the one who drew on the phones. He definitely has a lot of Beth characteristics. Obviously, he's artsy, and he brings hope and comfort to people through his art. He's the one who drew her for Rick, and then Michonne finds out that Rick had, that drawn several times, and, this man is the one who put the "just believe a little longer" on the phone. So, I mean, this guy is obviously very open and very kind, and he connects easily with people. He brings them hope, just the fact that he wrote that "believe a little longer." And as soon as we heard that in, what was that, episode 2 last week, we immediately connected it to Beth and her faith, So this guy I really liked him. He was fun. I do think, to some extent, he may be a foil to Jadis, just in the sense that Jadis also used to draw people. Remember, she drew the portraits above Maggie's desk at Hilltop, and one of those was of Beth. And so she would bring people comfort by drawing their loved ones as close as she could get it. And she's pretty much given that up as she's entered the CRM. She doesn't really do her art anymore. And she's chosen a much more buttoned down, rigid, and kind of bleak life, as opposed to bringing people comfort and peace and joy. So I think that, we can see that as a foil too. And of course, at any point, Jadis could do a Darth Vader and come back to the good side, but they also might be showing a negative trajectory for her because she's embraced the CRM and things are just not going to go well for her, it's as long as she stays on this path. So then we have this thing where Thorne finally does bring Michonne in a little bit to their group, and they go to this university, which again, this is the university where they're going to have a summit of all the CRM leaders. And, there's definitely a university theme, a repeating theme going on in the Walking Dead universe. I mean, of course, we have the university colony, or it was called the campus colony in The World Beyond, which the CRM actually slaughtered. But even back in season 4, when Daryl and Michonne go to get, meds because of everyone being sick at the prison, they go to a veterinary college. And we have we actually have a lot of Grady foreshadowing at that college. So I'm not sure exactly why they keep coming back to campuses and colleges, but we see it a lot as different locations. They do things there. So they have a bunch of walkers heading for a breach in the perimeter, and they need to kill them and redirect them any way they can. So they go out to do that, and they're using something called an R-dim, and Thorne wants to be the one to take it out. It's pretty much the weapon that's going to blow up the walkers and also help redirect them. And, it just doesn't work very well. There's too many. Things aren't going according to plan. She tells Michonne to stay back, and then Michonne, of course, ends up being the one to take it out there. Now, the biggest thing about this part that I noticed is that right before Michonne, grabs the machine and starts wheeling it out there, we actually have 2 blonde walkers that are shot in the forehead. I thought they were the same one at first. I thought we saw one get shot and then saw it go down, but actually looking at them, they're 2 different ones. One of them is it's hard to tell whether they're male or female. The walkers at this point are so disintegrated that sometimes you can't really tell. But one of them is wearing a denim jacket that kind of looks like the one Beth wore in season 2. And the first walker gets shot like directly between the eyes. So it's not quite where Beth was shot. But then as Michonne is wheeling this device out, we see her kind of wheel past another walker that's been shot. This one's been shot much higher in the forehead, closer to where Beth was. And it specifically focuses on that walker and the fact that it's bleeding from a bullet hole in its forehead as Michonne is going out. So what does this mean? I just think that this is a foreshadow for Beth's storyline, because we specifically have Michonne, who is not supposed to be there. She was told to stay back and not jump into the fray, but she's the one who takes the weapon out there that's going to end up making the difference and winning this little mini walker battle for them. And that is exactly what we have always thought that Beth's role would be in the CRM war. So I don't think she's necessarily going to be leading the entire war. I think that will be Rick. I mean, obviously, he's always been the leader. We've theorized before that all of the main characters might be generals under him, so they will be leaders, but just not like the ultimate leader or anything. But much like we saw in All Out War, you're probably going to have Maggie and Michonne and maybe a lot of the others, the smaller characters from Alexandria, Ezekiel, Eric, Jerry, people like that who are going to be leadership under Rick, and they will be his generals. And we've just always thought that Beth is going to be the secret weapon that is going to make a big difference at a pivotal moment in order to get the war won. And we don't know really what form that will take, but that's what we've always thought. So it was just really interesting to me that this is exactly what Michonne does in this scene. And it showed a blonde walker who gets shot in the forehead. It showed her laying on her side, bleeding from the wound in her forehead. And actually, we've even seen that stance before, not specifically with Beth. I mean, we never saw what she looked like after she fell in the hallway of Grady. We always talk about how it never showed her face, but the way her arm went out, she probably was lying on her side like that. And what it makes me think of is there's 2 of them, actually. In season 4, we have the scene where Maggie is looking for Glenn on the bus, and so she and Sasha and Bob pull all the walkers out of the bus and kill them all, and of course Glenn is not actually on the bus. But during that part, there's this one part that I always zeroed in on, because I was like, okay, that was so random, and why are they focusing on that right now? And it was because it was a blonde walker who gets shot in the forehead, and I think Maggie shoots it. I would have to go back and watch to be sure. And then the walker falls down on its side, and its arm is out like that. And it's like laying on its side, kind of on its arm. So when you think about it, its arm would be out the way Beth's was when it fell. And it's a blonde walker, and it gets shot in the forehead. And it's just like, okay, clearly they're foreshadowing something there, They're focusing on this walker. And then the other one I'm thinking of happened in Consumed. And in this case, we didn't see the walker's face. But it's where Daryl and Carol are on the bridge, and they get in the van because they're surrounded by walkers, right? But while they're first trying to get out, before they jump back in the van and realize they're going to have to drive the van off the bridge, they're fighting the walkers. And there's one point where you can hear them yelling at each other, like going, okay, go over here, okay, do this. And it's not actually showing them. It's showing a walker that's on the ground, lying on the ground. And you can't see its face in this case, so I couldn't say that it was a blonde walker who had a forehead wound, but it's lying on the ground in that same position. So it was like they were trying to foreshadow what was about to happen in all these really kind of random ways. And for the most part, they're so subtle that the general audience doesn't pick up on them. Anyway, but that was a total tangent. But anyway, so this walker in this episode, I just think that's what it was trying to say, is that this is a foreshadow for Beth's arc. And then Rick joins Michonne out there and helps her, and I don't know if he's maybe a stand-in for Daryl helping Beth or what, but it was a really fun scene. It was nice to see them work together, and then as soon as they get the bomb out there, they run away behind a tree, and of course there's the obligatory makeout scene that we all enjoy. So I really like that scene. Even then, Rick still is not wanting to leave just yet, but he and Michonne go back, and here we start to see a major problem with Thorne. She almost shoots Michonne, and Rick has to he steps in front of Michonne and just sort of fends her off, and she, doesn't end up doing it. But she's angry that Michonne went rogue, basically. And here is the biggest problem with this kind of leadership in the CRM. She really ought to be happy that they accomplished their aims. I mean, they should be working together no matter what that looks like to get something accomplished. When you have a team that works together, it doesn't matter who does what. It's not about being the big man or woman or achieving the glory. And you should just be glad that somebody took initiative, got it out there, it worked, and you accomplish what you needed to accomplish, and that's not what Thorne does. She's mad that Michonne went rogue. She's mad that Michonne is clearly a leader. And I don't know if that's because Thorne, I think at least part of it was that Thorne wanted the glory of it because she was going to take that bomb out herself and she just couldn't really manage it. So you can see that she's quite self-centered and a little bit toxic, and she's not going to make a terribly good leader. Even back in Alexandria with Rick, whenever we saw the group working together, of course they had their issues, but for the most part we saw them working together just to get things done, and it didn't matter who did what. And that's the way that it really should be, especially if you're trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse, right? So we're getting some really interesting characterizations here, and I think we're being set up for future storylines that are probably not going to go terribly well. We wouldn't expect them to in this world, right? We also do learn that Major General Bill wants to brief Rick, so Rick is going to move up just like Thorne has, and you kind of wonder what that's about, because even Thorne says when she first comes in to tell Rick that she's been promoted that she thought it would take years, because it does for most people. So it's a little bit suspicious that Thorne is promoting them so suddenly right now, and he even tells them that he thought Okafor was crazy to, let them in, and he thought he disagreed with Okafor saying that they had potential, so why would he suddenly promote them if that was the case? So, yeah, well, it'll be interesting. We'll see what's going on here. We also learn that Jadis is now stationed at that same college, so there's going to be plenty of tension between her and Michonne and Rick moving forward. And Michonne does see her for the first time. And that has to be, that has to be pretty shocking for Michonne, because this whole time she didn't know Jadis was around, and she didn't know Jadis had anything to do with Rick entering the CRM. So I hope that they talk more about that a little bit, because he doesn't really give her much of a chance to discuss it here. He does tell her that everything they have is broken and she has to go, and of course this is just him trying to get her to escape, and she's not going to do it. So we end with her throwing Rick out of the helicopter, so during the episode Insider at the end, like I talked about when they interview Gimple, a lot of times they interview the actors too, so we'll see some of them. And Andy Lincoln was talking about this ending, and that it just made me smile, because he absolutely loved this ending. He was like, I couldn't believe they were actually doing this as an ending, but he said that it might have been one of his favorite endings of any episode he's ever done, just because it was so over the top. She actually throws him out of a helicopter, but he loved it. He was totally geeking out about it, so I thought that was funny. Okay, so real quick, let's go back to the a couple of things. So I kind of have mentioned a few Grady references and Beth references, especially that walker, but there's a few more that I haven't talked about yet. One that I totally missed the first time is that Michonne calls herself Dana Bethune. So we have Beth's name in there. I was like, oh wow, I totally missed that. Galadriel Jones pointed it out to me. And a couple of things about that. Number one, Michonne is using a fake name, which I've talked about before. We've always felt like Beth will be using a fake name. And, sometimes I go, maybe that's just something we kind of made up or had a headcanon about, but then we see something like this and it's like, no, there's a reason we have a headcanon about that. They keep doing it, so there's got to be a reason they keep doing it. Galadriel Jones looked up the name Bethune to see if it was a real name. It is, and guess what? It has French origins. That is a French name. So, interesting nod to someone who might be in France. And then, was that all about the name? I thought I had one more thing about the name. Okay, well, if I did, I don't remember what it was now. So we have the name. And then we have this Beth lookalike. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I usually miss, because I'm so focused on the dialogue and the themes and connecting them to previous storylines and episodes. So I'm not as good at looking at, like, colors and patterns and shapes in the background. And sometimes I miss this kind of thing. So I'm so glad that my fellow theorists caught it. But this woman, she's blonde. She's kind of what we would call a Beth doppelganger. And we always see her in the market when they're there. So we actually do see her behind Rick the first time that he meets up with Jadis. And remember, that was years ago, right? And then we see her a couple of other times with Michonne as well. So this woman is clearly someone who lives in the CR, and she's in the background. And we see her every time they go into this market, and she's buying different things. At one point, she's buying what look like green leeks. And then another time, she's got these giant carrots that she's buying. And the carrots, the leeks we could talk about a little bit. I'm sure they've been mentioned before, and there's the greenery part of it, right? But the carrots really, really caught my interest, because if you remember, originally for the episode alone when Daryl and Beth were in the funeral home, and it's specifically for the candlelight dinner scene. Gimple wanted there to be playing a song called The King of Carrot Flowers, and he tried to make that happen, but they couldn't secure the copyright for it. So they weren't able to use that song, and they didn't really use any song in that part. They just went with, more of a silent kind of ambiance. But the point is, carrots have always been a big Beth symbol. We saw them in season 4. We saw them in paintings. We've seen them around rabbits a lot, and of course, because they're rabbit food. But carrots always grow in 2 seasons. So there's like the baby carrot season, which is the first season, and then it's like a whole other phase of growth, I guess, is the second season, which is when they've matured, and that's different from most other plants. Like their whole growing season is different. And so we've kind of seen that as a Beth symbol because, in the first time we saw her, the first time through, she was still in her baby phase. She was still, had not grown and matured into the character that she will become, and there's going to be this whole second wave for her when she comes back around and we see her again, and then she will be in her more mature phase. And understand, I don't mean mature like she was a little kid at first and now she's not. It's more like growing as a person, growing as a character, becoming able to take care of herself, becoming strong. And that's why there was so much of them saying that when we first, in season 4 and season 5, saying, I am strong, I wish I could just change, you did, all of that, because they were foreshadowing that when she came back, she would be all of that. And that's why we have the carrot symbolism. So yeah, I'm sure there are people who would say, oh, it's just a blonde woman in the background, you're just reading too much into it. But there's the fact that we see her multiple times, like every single time they come into that marketplace. I mean, I kind of made the joke, it almost seems like maybe she's stalking Rick or something. Why is she always there when he's there? But that would have been a purposeful choice on the part of the writers. If they just wanted people to be in the marketplace to show, a thriving city, they would have just put random extras in there every time, and they probably would have made sure not to put the same ones there because that almost wouldn't have made sense. But they put this woman there every single time. Okay, she's always there. And then she's carrying carrots. And I was like, okay, well, that pretty much clinches it for me. She's clearly supposed to be indicative of Beth, So what does that mean? Why are they putting her there? I mean, yes, it's a nod. There's a lot of reasons, but it also could be showing that she's in the background somewhere in the CRM. And Rick and Michonne don't recognize that. They don't know she's there, but she's around somewhere. I think that's what they're trying to tell us. One of my fellow theorists also looked into what she's wearing and the outfit she's wearing, especially in the picture. I'll put it on here. She's wearing like a white coat and then a beret. That's very French. It's a French fashion. So we have another nod to France there with about the doppelganger. And all this important stuff is going on about the CRM, about Rick, about Jadis, all of that, while this woman is just ho-humming around in the background buying carrots. Not a coincidence, my friends. Not a coincidence. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here for today. That was most of the big things I had. I'm sure there's a few little things that I missed. But yeah, this was actually a really fun episode. I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited for the next episode. I will say, as a little bit of a preview, that in the preview for the next episode, there's a part where Rick says we have to go back. And that we're really tying heavily to season 5. If you remember, season 5, they had a you can't go back theme. It was said many times during season 5 around Terminus and around Grady. And now he's saying we have to go back, and we're finally, I feel like, kind of understanding what that theme was all about. But I'm going to leave that for next week until we actually see that episode. So let me know what you guys thought of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I will try to get some Ask videos out later this week, but there's going to be a lot fewer than last week. Last week I got like 5 of them out, and this week it's probably only going to be 1, maybe 2 if I can find the time. So, but go ahead and send your asks in about it and tell me what you thought of the episode, and I will do my best to get them all done by the end of the week. I hope you all have a great week and are enjoying the show. Bye.